Well, hello everyone. Welcome to one more lecture of this self-knowledge course. Remember that this self-knowledge course consists of 50 lectures of its phase A and 25 lectures on its phase B. And these lectures have only the purpose of giving you totally for free all the information, the practices, the techniques that you need to develop in yourself so you get to know yourself, awaken 100% of your consciousness, and get to achieve the self realization of your being. We are seeing these lectures live on this Facebook page every Wednesdays and Fridays at 6 p.m. CST time on its phase A, and the phase B on Tuesdays. Let me check. No, on Saturday. Sorry, that I have another lectures on Spanish at that time. And well, in the previous lecture of the phase A, the one that we were teaching on Wednesday, we learned about two laws of force, the law of entropy and the law of the octaves and the law of entropy. And we were learning how to take advantage of the stream of sound or the stream of life to raise our inner work in every time higher octaves. And we learned how to counteract the law of entropy that constantly lead us to lose energy and to lose strength in whatever we undertake. In today's lecture, we are going to see how, after strongly embarking on this path that will lead us to achieve that great purpose of our existence, that is to achieve the self-realization of our being, to reach that goal by making us a permanent center of gravity in relation to our consciousness that allow us to have continuity of purposes and perseverance in this work towards self-knowledge. So you are gonna see, let me put here some slides so I can show you better this information. And you are going to see that the objective of today's topic will be to understand the importance of dedicating our entire existence, the most of our time, the most of our energy, invest our time and energy in achieving that self-realization of our being. And we are going to see today how to achieve a continuity of purposes that will ensure success in this. And well, you can see that you can have at some point very strong or a very like a great longing, spiritual longing. But when you try to do the practices, when you try to embark yourself in the path to the awakening of your consciousness, there is a lot of things that don't allow you to be successful in this path. Today, we are going to see how we can overcome all those situations and how we can achieve a continuity of purposes that will ensure us success in this path, in this existence. We have tried to make this work in many existences, and we are still here. We are trying once again. So we make sure that this time is the time that now we are going to make it. We need to learn how to achieve continuity of purposes and how to start generating a center of gravity around the things of our consciousness. And I think that to get into context in this topic, we need to first analyze what is the center of gravity. We know that the law of gravity applies in the whole universe. We see how the planets go around the sun and how we see even the moons that go around the planets, and they are attracted by a gravitational force that keeps them permanently spinning in that orbit. It is thanks to this that the universe maintains an order, an organization. Otherwise, everything would be like scattered and without any order. So, the center of gravity is that point where the forces or energies converge. We in our psychology also have a center of gravity. The interesting thing is to discover where we have placed that gravitational point in ourselves, whether we revolved around personality or around consciousness. In in the stage that we currently are, we tend to always gravitate around the things of the personality. But if we want to begin to advance in our spiritual work, we must begin to revolve around our consciousness. We must learn to transform this center of gravity so that we can achieve everything we set out to do in relation to our spiritual work. Because if all of our forces and energy are focused on the same point, then that objective will gain strength. And if one is seriously thinking on achieving self realization, on transforming from a human personality to a solar man, and from a solar man to a superman, and from a superman to an absolute man, there needs to be continuity of purpose. And well, every human being has a center of gravity, as I was saying, and that center of gravity will be in what we dedicate ourselves to with continuity of purposes. We will see that if we have continuity of purpose based on a certain objective, it is certainly it is like certain that we will be able to achieve that objective. But if we are dispersed, we will not obtain results. And this not only happened in the inner work, but also in any aspect of life itself. For example, a person who has practiced the piano since he was a child, devoting a good number of hours to his daily practice, and with continuity of purpose towards that goal, which is like to be the best pianist of his time. When he grows up, he achieves this goal because he had a continuity of purpose, unlike anyone else who didn't have that continuity of purposes. So it is clear that we are going to go for higher goals than any temporary achievement that the personality can reach in this third dimension, since we are going for self-realization. And if our goal is really to achieve liberation, to reach enlightenment, be a being of awakened consciousness, our time and our energies must be focused on that goal, which is to become a solar man. We need to start having continuity of purposes on that. But what happens? That as within us, we are not one, but we are many, as we studied in the lecture 32 of the radical change. It is very difficult for us to have a continuity of purposes. We want to self-realize ourselves, but we don't have within us a responsible individual who can start, continue, and achieve that goal. The only responsible individual that could lead us to reach that goal is our consciousness. But what happens that our consciousness, as it is trapped by our ego, it almost never expresses itself in us because we don't let it express itself. On the contrary, we have a multiplicity of psychological defects that are the ones that are constantly taking the control of our physical body, of this human machine, of each one of the functions of this body, and each one of those individuals, the multiple individuals that make up our ego, they think differently. They are each independent of each other, and each of them have their own egoic interest and their own mental concepts. So we can verify this that I'm saying by remembering any moment in which we have chosen and bought, for example, something. And when we did so, we were very excited about that. And we really liked that. But a few days later, we start seeing like defects on that. And we find that another model is more beautiful or is better because the defect, the psychological self that was buying this, that like this, is not the same that is manifesting at another moment. Or we can see that when you get a couple, when you meet someone, the self, the psychological defect that is in love of that person, which is a defect of lust, is not the same that is hating the same person a couple of months or years later. Or on the same example of a musical instrument. Uh, you can be very excited about learning how to play such instrument, and you get to even buy the instrument and you start the practices, with encouragement. But as more and more skill is required, or a continuity of purposes in that is required to achieve a skill, then another self comes, uh, be it like laziness, for example, another one that is very different from the one who wanted so much to learn to play the guitar, for example, so much enthusiasm. And the one expressing now is interest in better spend it with friends or watching, I don't know, a series, dedicating himself to anything else. And that is where, at that point, is where that musical longing ends. And it is that what a psychological self affirms at a given moment cannot like represent any seriousness. Cannot, because after a few hours we just think differently because another defect is manifesting later. And as long as there is not a responsible individual within us who is like this spokesperson, who positively guides our physical body, in this case, obviously the consciousness, then it will be very difficult to have a continuity of purposes in something. Many people live inside us, and each one has their own way of thinking and their own way of doing things. 97% of our essence is trapped in our multiplicity of negative ways of being. What we want today, we hate tomorrow. What we are passionate about today, we dislike tomorrow. What interests us today loses interest tomorrow. And this is the reason why it is so difficult for us to achieve objectives, to achieve goals. And therefore, it is the same thing that will not allow us to achieve that final objective or that great purpose of our existence, which is, achieve total liberation and the awakening of 100% of our consciousness. As long as we don't learn to have a continuity of purposes in psychological death, so that our consciousness can start constantly manifesting itself in us, we will not be that responsible individual who seriously brings his inner work to a successful conclusion. And well, as we saw, inside a person, many people live. Then what happens? That the full sense of responsibility doesn't exist in us. It doesn't really exist in us. That is our current reality. Many people you can see that have a longing for self-realization, and they receive the knowledge, and you can see that they have a lot of strength. However, very few remain, continue, reach the final goal. And this is because as long as we don't get a permanent center of gravity around that main objective, and as long as we don't set a continuity of purposes in the aspects that will lead us to that objective, to that goal, we won't make it. The self, the psychological self that today wants to self-realize, tomorrow is replaced by another that is more interested in things of life and personality. And the thing is that this work is totally practical, totally. And we have to do it by ourselves. No one is going to come and to do this work for us. That is the reason why it is so hard, because we prefer to wait for someone to come and save us, you know, and that is not going to happen. No one is going to come to save us from ourselves. At most can come messengers to show us the way and to demonstrate with their lives that liberation and enlightenment are possible, but the work itself has to be done by each one of us individually. So, if we want to really advance in this work, we must create a permanent center of gravity. Many people come strongly to these studies and with a lot of encouragement, but after a while they lose that encouragement and don't want to know anything about this knowledge or inner work, psychological depth, or meditation. It is also the case that many withdraw for any reason, fair or unfair, complicated or simple. And then they tend to join or enter different pseudo esoteric schools where they are asked for a registration or an economic contribution in exchange for a belief, or to make them believers of something, and in those places, making them believe that by attending those meetings or calls or by giving any economic contribution, they will achieve an internal progress, that they are internally advancing. And this happens because the person didn't know how to maintain a continuity of purposes in the interior work and prefer to look where where they offer, like an easy salvation. And well, actually, the most normal thing is that people get excited at the prospect of being able to awaken their consciousness, and that after a while they abandon that purpose. The real like rare thing, it very rarely happens, is that someone doesn't live the inner work and manage to become a solar man. And the creation of the solar man is absolutely not possible if we don't first establish a permanent center of gravity within ourselves. But now that I'm talking about a solar man, let's see what is a solar man. A solar man is one who manages to develop within himself those solar germs that will allow him to create himself internally and to serve to the interest of the solar experiment. And what is the solar experiment? It is that creation that God, let's call it like that, makes. That God, that we can call the sacred absolute Son, and we in lecture number 28, we were talking about, for example, the universal Christ. We were talking about the group of gods or Christ that make up the manifested God, or the universal Christ. And well, the solar experiment is that creation that the Son makes with the aim of being able to develop solar men, or men who awaken 100% of their consciousness, men who develop their individual Christ or their inner fire, so that they become an active part of that universal Christ, which is the sacred absolute Son. And the reason why the universe, the galaxies, the planets, the human beings of these and other planets were created is so that the sparks that emanated from the absolute Son, and you know that everyone has a divine spark within them, have the possibility of becoming a solar man. That is the reason. There is no other reason for the existence to exist. Although science doesn't admit it or doesn't know it, the vast majority of planets in these solar systems and in the galaxy and in the universe actually have intelligent life, and that life actually exists for the same purpose, to get men and women, we are talking about the same, who work on themselves, who self-realize themselves, and who incarnate, uh, you know, their intimate Christ. That is the purpose of all creation. And for this, within each human being, there are some solar germs that allow this objective to be fulfilled. And those solar germs are the creative sexual energy that is found in our sexual gonads, in the testicles in men, and in the ovaries in the case of the woman. And using the transmutation of that energy, which is the suprasexuality, we can create ourselves, meaning that we are all a potential solar man. And well, what is going on? That not all solar germs germinate or develop. Not all seeds germinate. Most are actually lost. And as we see in that parable of the sower that is in the Bible, uh, you can see there that some fall on the road and are eaten by the pigeons, or other fall on stones and they germinate but cannot like take root and they end up like drying up. And other fall among grasses or thorns and are covered and destroyed by them, while others, on the other hand, fail on a fertile ground, and these are the ones that actually germinate, they grow and develop. And this is what happens within us the same. We have that seed or solar germs within us, but we must have favorable circumstances so that they can develop. So, what are like the requirements for that solar seeds that we have inside to germinate? First, we need to have three aspects of our body in good condition to do this work. First, the mind. So, our mind must be in a good condition, because with our mind is with which we can reflect, we can consciously imagine, we can get to use our free will to be able to deny or refuse our desires. So if a person has problems of the mind, but to the point that he can't even reflect, then he wouldn't be able to do this inner work. None in this existence. Another aspect that must be in good condition is our spine. This one must be in good condition, since it is through our spinal cord that the creative sexual energy will rise and will create our existential bodies of the being with the practice of the suprasexuality. The spine cannot have breaks. It could have a hernia or a deviation. That is not a problem. But if the spine is broken, the person is disabled and cannot raise the energy. And the third aspect must be in good conditions for these seeds to germinate is the sexual apparatus. If a person had, for example, a tubal cut or a vasectomy, or if the woman had her uterus removed, then wouldn't be able to do the work of the sexual transmutation. There are also cases in which the woman has like a tubal ligation, but by making another surgery, they can get to reconnect this part. Or in the case of a man that had a vasectomy and with another surgery, they can connect that tube again. Then by reversing that operation, then can have the opportunity of doing this work. But if the person had the uterus or ovaries removed, or the man lost his, for example, testicles, it can no longer be rebuilt, that process. Then that person cannot work in this existence with the factor of the spiritual birth and can only work on the other two factors, the psychological death and the sacrifice for humanity, so that in a future existence, the divine law give him a new physical body and then can transcend that karma and can work on the three factors and achieve a self-realization. And well, in addition to having these three aspects in a normal state, mind, spine, and sexual apparatus, the person must have the objective knowledge of the three factors for the consciousness revolution. Focus on practice. Must know how to practice the psychological death from moment to moment, to self-observe, to practice the reflective meditation, needs to know how to create the existential bodies of the being through the practice of the suprasexuality, must know the step-by-step of the practice, the requirements for the practice that are fidelity, chastity, and love, and a person must know how to gain dharma by working selflessly for humanity. And well, by having a physical body in good condition and having this knowledge like very clear, and start practicing this knowledge, the third requirement will be to achieve that continuity of purposes in each of those practices that will ensure us to achieve successfully that wonderful purpose of our existence. But we must have clear that any race created by the sun has no other objective than to serve to the interests of this creation and to the solar experiment. So I was saying, all the sparks that come out of the absolute come with that purpose, and from each of the races that have existed on the planet, the sun has achieved some triumphs, has like harvest small groups of solar men, who have been all those men who throughout the history of the planet have managed to awaken their consciousness. But it happens that unfortunately the majority of humanity today is not interested in inner work. And there are very few who have those three requirements that we are talking about. And it happens that if the sun fails in its experiment and it loses all interest in such a race, the race is condemned to destruction and evolution. Because when a race has given its fruits, it like progressively disappears, or it disappears violently through great catastrophes. And this with the purpose that there be a process of revitalization of the planet and give way to the formation of a new race that begins its entire development process, beginning with the golden age of the race and going through all the whole process. So a practical example that we could see to understand this is that if we like sow some seed in land and the land burns or the land is not fertile and these seeds do not germinate, what will we do? Well, we would remove that damaged crop and recondition the land again to plant another new crop. And that the same will happen on this earth with this race. It is actually starting to happen. This Aryan race, which is the fifth race that this planet has given, no longer bears fruit, and everyone definitely wants to degenerate, then we are doomed to destruction. So this planet is at that point, it has already been condemned because there are almost no people really interested in regenerating. We are already very degenerate and we defend and celebrate our degeneration. So we are already living the final part of the race, since little by little, it will be eliminated through catastrophes and wars. And well, However, those who still want to work on themselves and manage to at least regenerate their physical body and their vital body will be able to be part of the exodus, and they could be the first settles of the next race. So we have to keep in mind that only by working on ourselves with true continuity of purposes and a full sense of moral responsibility, we can come to become solar men. And this is going to imply that we consecrate the totality of our existence to the esoteric work on ourselves. So, in order for us to achieve a center of gravity around our consciousness that lead us to self-realization, the first thing we need to do is make the decision to consecrate our entire existence, or what is left of our existence, to achieving this purpose. This may be the most important decision we make in our lives. And if we really have that firm decision, we have to grow. We have to make it grow. And we need to know that in order to have a center of gravity around that decision, we need to dedicate our time to achieving this purpose. The center of gravity is summed up in one word, and that word is time. And our center of gravity will always be around what we spend the most time on. You can easily see that. People usually have their center of gravity, around their profession, the doctor in his consultations, in his prescriptions, the housewife in the things of her home, in the children. You are going to see, for example, the musicians are going to have their center of gravity around their rehearsals, their concerts, the architect in his plans, his works, etc. But all of this belong to the personality. They can lead us to reap material or personal fruits, yes, for this existence. However, they will not lead us to achieve anything that can transcend, nothing that can really transcend time, or nor lead us to achieve the purpose of our existence. However, our 3% is not interested at all in the subjective things of the personality. What our 3% really care about is about being born, which is creating the existential bodies of the being, about dying, which is release and awaken the consciousness, and about helping others to know what is the path towards self-realization. That is like the profession or the work of our inner being. And it is our being, our 3%, who knows how to retrace the entire path that will take us back to the stars. So we must focus with continuity of purposes on the work of the being. But if we analyze that we spent our time on throughout the day, if we really check that, what are we spending our time every day? We are going to see that we spend time with the family, material work, social commitments, leisure, WhatsApp, Facebook, watching movies, and the different things of the personality. And we can get to see how little time we are really dedicated to the things of the consciousness. So we must encourage ourselves to begin to make a gradual change, to take time away, start taking time away from the personality and start giving it to the things of the consciousness. This change must be gradual, because when you make changes, fanatically, you don't really get results. So the idea is to take it up little by little. If we sleep, for example, 9 hours, then we take 2 hours of sleeping and put 1 hour to practice suprasexuality, 1 hour on the meditation of a certain psychological defect, and we maintain that over time. We do it with determination, with continuity of purposes. We, for example, take away a few hours that we previously dedicated to leisure, whatever, and we take the time to do our practices of watching and praying. For example, that we learned in the lecture 21, the practice that allow us to develop concentration, or also to make our practices of transfer of funds that we learned in the lecture 13, along with the practice of the negotiation with the law, or to make practices of astral projection, etc. And what we do is that we sustain that over time. And so we gradually take time away from the personality and put time into making also some sacrifice for humanity, talking to others about the things that we have learned and experienced with this knowledge, preparing ourselves to teach this knowledge, and above all, keep ourselves in constant self-observation and practicing the psychological depth from moment to moment to eliminate all those psychological defects that are manifesting in us, making us lose strength and making us to identify ourselves with the things of the world and the personality, and start losing like that longing for the spiritual progress. And they make us return to the things of, the world, life, the personality. So we must be eliminating all of that. And if we do so, gradually we are going to start seeing advances in our inner work, and we are going to certainly achieve the self-realization of our being. And well, now to finish this topic, I want to touch on this point that is very important that we take into account, since our ego is lunar. And it is not easy to become a solar man when we carry the moon within us. In the lecture number 9, where we talk about the infradimensions that live in our lower abdomen, we talk about the fact that we have two moons inside us, the visible moon and the hidden moon or invisible moon. So we talk about how this hidden moon, how that visible moon represents the fascination that we have with the things of the personality and all those good defects that we have inside us, and that we can easily see, but that we justify because we see them as something normal. And the invisible moon is the dark part of our psychology, and actually represents the heaviest defects that we have, and that only come out at certain times. And also, the same, the earth has two moons. The first one is the moon that we all see, at night, and that moon is esoterically known as Nahema. And the second moon is called Lilith, and it is like a little, it is it's more distant than the white moon, and it's a small one, and that is the black moon. And Lilith in her orbit gets closer in certain parts of the year to the planet. And what happens that when this moon gets closer, activates the heaviest defects in people's psychology, and actually the most sinister forces of the ego reach Earth from Lilith and produce subhuman and even bestial psychological results. So the crimes of the red press, the most monstrous murders in history, the most suspected crimes are due to the vibratory waves of Lilith. So it happens that when we receive those vibratory waves, we usually enter into crisis. We don't want to meditate, we lose force, we don't want to practice, etc. It is like a short period of time during the year. It is like 3 times during the year, but it is not like long times. But anyways, many people lose their strength at that time, and they end up like losing the spiritual longing, and going out or living the practices and trying to achieve the self-realization. So it is very important that in those moments of crisis, when we feel ourselves like going through that, that we start appealing to our inner strength and don't let ourselves to be dragged, and that we maintain our continuity of purposes. Since whoever stands firm in those moments of crisis and continues doing his practices even though feels like without spirit, they do so, they receive more inner strength to continue advancing. And well, to finish, I remind you that there are so many excuses in these questions. There are so many evasions. There are so many fascinating attractions that, in fact, it is often almost impossible to understand the urgency of the esoteric work. And we hope that we can reach that understanding and that this lecture help you to have clarity on how to achieve a permanent center of gravity around your inner work. And anyways, if you have any question about this topic, you can leave your questions. You can leave me your questions there in the chat, and I will be gladly solving any question that you have. Or you can write, you can contact me through the messenger of the page, and I will be gladly solving any question that you have. And well, without anything else to add, I will invite you to our next lecture that we are going to be seeing on Friday. And we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic. We are going to be talking about emotional dependence. And we are going to be talking about the explanation about family and attachments. And we are going to understand many things in relation to the family and in relation to the attachments that we create around the people and the things. So don't miss that interesting topic. And well, that is all for today. Thank you very much to all of you, and have a happy rest of the day. Ciao, ciao.